The office was alive with the usual hum of activity. Phones rang, printers whirred, and employees moved quickly from one desk to another, carrying documents and laptops. The sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, glinting off the polished floors and the sleek furniture. Among the people in the office, there was one person who seemed almost invisible, quietly going about her work. She was the cleaning lady, moving slowly but deliberately with a mop and bucket in hand. She had worked in the building for many years and knew every corner, every stain, and every forgotten crumb. Most people barely noticed her, but she was an essential part of the daily rhythm of the office. That morning, the atmosphere was slightly different. The millionaire's son had arrived, his expensive shoes clicking sharply on the floor as he walked with a sense of entitlement that seemed to demand attention. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and carried himself with an air of superiority. His presence often made people uneasy, not because he was cruel all the time, but because he had a way of reminding everyone of his wealth and his father's power. Today, though, he seemed particularly impatient and irritated. As he moved through the office, his eyes scanned the area, not with curiosity or interest in his employees' work, but with judgment. When he spotted the cleaning lady mopping near, the entrance to one of the main conference rooms, he stopped in his tracks. He frowned and shook his head, his face twisted into an expression of disdain. Without warning, he raised his voice, loud enough for nearby employees to hear. "Is that the best you can do?" he sneered. "Look at this mess. Are you even trying, or are you just wasting everyone's time?" The cleaning lady paused, her hand resting on the mop handle. She looked up calmly at him, her eyes steady, though there was a quiet pain in them. She had encountered difficult people before, but this was different. His words were sharp, cutting, and public, meant to humiliate rather than correct. Yet she did not respond with anger. She took a deep breath and continued her work, carefully wiping the floor with slow, deliberate movements, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Some employees nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had seen this behavior before and knew how difficult it was to intervene. The millionaire's son had a way of making people feel small, not through physical threats, but through the weight of his arrogance. No one spoke up, even though they felt the injustice of the moment keenly. They watched silently, hoping the situation would pass without escalating further. The son, however, was not satisfied. He took a few steps closer, towering over her with a smug expression. "Seriously, are you even capable of doing this job properly? Maybe your parents should have taught you better skills. Or maybe cleaning isn't for everyone, huh?" He laughed mockingly, the sound echoing through the office. Despite his harsh words, the cleaning lady did not flinch. She moved steadily, making sure the mop covered every corner of the floor. Her hands were steady, her mind focused, but inside, she felt a storm of emotions. She was hurt, yes, but she also felt a surge of determination. She knew that reacting with anger or tears would only confirm the image he wanted to project, a weak, powerless person to ridicule. She was more than that, and she would find a way to show it, even if not immediately. The millionaire's son finally turned away, muttering under his breath about incompetence and inefficiency, leaving a trail of tension behind him. He walked toward the elevator, completely unaware that his words had sparked something in her. She finished mopping the area with careful attention, as if every sweep of the mop was a silent declaration of her dignity and strength. After he left, a few employees came over quietly, whispering words of sympathy and encouragement. "Don't mind him," one said softly. "He's always like that. He doesn't understand what respect means." Another added, "You did the right thing by staying calm. Most people would have yelled back." She nodded politely, appreciating their concern but not wanting to dwell on it. She understood that pity was not the solution, and neither was confrontation. She needed a plan, a way to prove her worth without lowering herself to his level. As the morning progressed, the office slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Phones rang, keyboards clattered, and employees immersed themselves in their tasks. The cleaning lady moved from one section to another, her presence quiet but significant. She noticed small things that others missed: a loose chair leg, a smudge on a window, a sticky spot on the floor, and quietly fixed them. Her work was meticulous, precise, and done with a sense of pride. She had learned long ago that her efforts might go unnoticed by some, but they made a difference, and that was what mattered. Meanwhile, the millionaire's son continued to parade around the office, flaunting his father's wealth, making decisions, without consulting anyone, and speaking in a tone that implied he knew better than everyone else. His arrogance was obvious, and yet he was blind to the fact that respect and authority were not the same. He assumed that money and privilege granted him superiority, but he had yet to understand the value of humility and hard work. The cleaning lady, however, had seen enough to know that patience and observation could be powerful tools. She had a quiet intelligence that others often underestimated. She began to notice patterns, how decisions were made, where mistakes occurred, and how small improvements could make a big difference. She listened more than she spoke, watching carefully, taking mental notes. She knew that if she remained diligent and strategic, she could turn the situation to her advantage in a way that would surprise everyone, including the arrogant young man who had insulted her so publicly. By lunchtime, the cleaning lady had finished her rounds. She paused near the window, taking a brief moment to rest and gather her thoughts. She looked out at the city beyond, reflecting on her life, her challenges, and the unfairness she often faced. Yet, she also felt a quiet confidence building inside her. She had faced difficult people before and had always found a way to navigate through their arrogance. This was no different, except the stakes were higher this time. The millionaire's son had underestimated her, and that would be his mistake. She returned to her work with renewed focus. Every sweep of the mop, every wipe of the desk, every small act of care was done with intention. She was sending a silent message. She would not be diminished, and her worth was not determined by someone else's arrogance. Her calm demeanor and meticulous work stood in stark contrast to the son's brash and careless attitude. Even those who had initially pitied her began to notice her quiet strength, though they did not yet understand the full extent of it. As the day came to an end, the cleaning lady prepared to leave the office, pushing her mop and bucket toward the storage room. She paused briefly to glance at the empty desks and the orderly space she had helped maintain. A sense of quiet satisfaction washed over her. She knew that the battle was not over, and that the young man's arrogance would continue to be a challenge. But she also knew that she had something he did not: patience, intelligence, and the ability to act with dignity, even in the face of disrespect. The millionaire's son left the office in a hurry, likely oblivious to the thoughts swirling around him. He felt accomplished in his display of superiority, yet he had no idea that the cleaning lady's quiet mind was already at work, formulating plans and strategies that could one day turn the tables. The office settled into its evening rhythm, the hum of activity fading as employees wrapped up their work. The cleaning lady walked home slowly, reflecting on the day, and her mind buzzed with possibilities. In that moment, she realized that her life was not defined by insults or the arrogance of others. Her worth was measured by her actions, her resilience, and her integrity. She would find a way to make a difference, not through confrontation or anger, but through her intelligence, skill, and perseverance. And one day, those who had underestimated her would see just how powerful she truly was. The next morning, the office buzzed with the usual activity, but there was a subtle undercurrent of tension. Employees whispered quietly in corners, glancing occasionally at the cleaning lady as she moved with quiet efficiency through the aisles. The incident from the day before had not been forgotten. Though many wanted to say something to her, no one could quite find the right words. Respect, fear, and uncertainty mingled in the office air. People were aware of her dignity, and they were beginning to see her as more than just the person who kept the office clean. She arrived early before most employees and started her routine calmly. Her steps were deliberate, her eyes attentive. She noticed things others overlooked, from small dust piles in corners to fingerprints on glass surfaces. Her hands worked steadily, her focus absolute. Yet behind her calm exterior, her mind was active, analyzing, observing, and taking mental notes. She understood the office dynamics in ways the millionaire's son never would. She had learned that patience and observation could be more powerful than anger or retaliation. The millionaire's son arrived shortly after. As usual, he strode in with a sense of entitlement, expecting the world to revolve around him. His eyes immediately fell on her. He smirked, as if preparing for another performance. But today she did not look up. She continued her work, ignoring him completely. This subtle defiance irritated him. He thrived on attention, whether it was admiration or fear, and her indifference was a new challenge. He wandered around, trying to find someone to impress or criticize, but she did not react. She moved through the office quietly, making small adjustments to her surroundings, picking up misplaced papers, straightening chairs, and wiping down surfaces. Her actions were unnoticed by most, but they created an atmosphere of order that was slowly starting to influence the office without anyone realizing it. Employees began to feel a strange sense of calm and efficiency, even if they could not explain why. In one corner, a group of employees whispered among themselves. "Did you see how calm she is?" one said. "Even after being insulted yesterday, she didn't react. That takes courage." Another added, "Yes, but there's something more. She seems smart, really smart. She notices everything." The cleaning lady continued her rounds, paying attention to the smallest details. She observed how the employees worked, how decisions were made, and where inefficiencies occurred. She noticed that some tasks were duplicated unnecessarily, that important files were often misplaced, and that there were gaps in communication that caused confusion. She didn't say anything yet. She simply watched and understood. This was her advantage. Unlike the millionaire's son, who acted impulsively and carelessly, she had patience and a keen mind for strategy. During a brief break, she sat in the corner of the office sipping a cup of tea she had brought from home. She watched as employees hurried about, some stressed, some distracted, and some unsure of how to handle the son's arrogance. She reflected on her own life, her challenges, and the small victories she had achieved. Despite her position, she had learned resilience. She had learned that respect was earned, not demanded. She had learned to act with intelligence rather than emotion. And now she began to plan how she could quietly make a difference in the office, proving her worth in a way that no one could ignore. The millionaire's son, meanwhile, continued his usual routine of criticism and showmanship. He stopped at desks, checked files, and made comments on the work of employees, often belittling them without realizing the harm he caused. Some employees tried to avoid him. Others endured his comments in silence. He had no idea that the cleaning lady, the person he thought of as insignificant, was already noticing patterns and problems he overlooked. She was quietly gathering information, learning the weak points of the office operations and thinking of ways she could improve things without anyone noticing. Her mind worked like a puzzle, connecting pieces that others ignored. As the day went on, small but meaningful things began to happen. The cleaning lady would rearrange misplaced items in the office so that employees could find them easily. She would organize files that had been carelessly stacked, and she would clean areas that often went unnoticed but affected productivity. Gradually, the office started to feel different. People didn't realize that the changes were coming from her, but they noticed that tasks were getting done more smoothly. There was less confusion, less frustration, and a sense of subtle efficiency that was unfamiliar but welcome. Some employees started to feel a quiet admiration for her. They whispered about how she moved silently but made everything feel better. One employee said, "It's strange, but things are running more smoothly. I don't know why, but I think she's behind it." Another nodded. "Yes, she may just be a cleaning lady, but she has a sharp mind. She notices what the rest of us miss." The millionaire's son, as usual, was oblivious. He continued to flaunt his privilege, making decisions without consulting anyone and expecting instant results. He believed that authority came from wealth, but he did not understand that true influence came from respect, skill, and intelligence. The cleaning lady, in contrast, was quietly building influence through action, not words. She had learned that observation and patience were far more powerful than arrogance and noise. During lunch, she took a quiet seat by the window, watching the world outside. She reflected on the subtle ways she could impact the office. She began to jot down notes in a small notebook she carried with her, detailing inefficiencies she had observed and ideas for improvement. She didn't plan to reveal her knowledge immediately. She wanted to understand the environment completely before taking any action. She wanted her contributions to be undeniable enough that even the millionaire's son could not dismiss them. The afternoon passed much like the morning. The cleaning lady continued her work, meticulously observing, correcting small mistakes, and maintaining her calm demeanor. Employees were starting to take notice of her efficiency and intelligence, even if they didn't yet understand the full extent of her abilities. The office atmosphere had subtly shifted. There was an undercurrent of admiration for someone who had been underestimated, and a growing awareness that the arrogant son's behavior was not the only factor shaping the office. As the day came to a close, the cleaning lady paused near her mop and bucket, taking a moment to rest and reflect. She knew that her journey was just beginning. She had endured insults, had remained calm, and had quietly learned the ways of the office. She understood the power of observation, patience, and intelligence. The millionaire's son had underestimated her completely, and that would be his mistake. She knew that in time her skills, knowledge, and quiet determination would allow her to make a profound impact. She left the office with a sense of purpose, knowing that the events of the previous day and today were just the beginning. She had laid the groundwork for a future where her abilities would shine, and where respect would be earned through action rather than demanded through privilege. The office would soon see that the cleaning lady, the person they had overlooked, was capable of far more than anyone had imagined. Her mind was already planning the next steps, considering ways to make a meaningful difference that would shock the arrogant young man and inspire everyone else. In her quiet strength, she was already winning. The days passed and the office settled into its usual rhythm, but things had subtly begun to change. The cleaning lady moved through the space with quiet purpose, her eyes always scanning, her mind always observing. She had begun to notice inefficiencies that were costing the company time and money. Files were misplaced, schedules were poorly coordinated, and simple tasks often took longer than necessary because no one had taken the time to organize them properly. She didn't speak up immediately, knowing that bold words would fall on deaf ears. Instead, she began acting quietly, making small but impactful changes while no one was looking. She started with the small details that often went unnoticed but had a ripple effect on productivity. She organized the files in the storage room, labeling them clearly and arranging them logically. She repaired chairs that wobbled and adjusted office equipment that was slightly out of place. Even minor changes like moving the office supplies closer to where they were needed made a noticeable difference. Employees began to feel that things were running more smoothly, but they didn't know who was behind the improvements. The atmosphere felt subtly lighter, more efficient and calmer, though no one could pinpoint why. Meanwhile, the millionaire's son continued with his usual routine, oblivious to the shifts happening around him. He criticized employees for minor mistakes and demanded instant solutions to problems without understanding their complexity. He considered himself the smartest person in the room simply because of his father's wealth. But in reality, his arrogance blinded him to the small but important details that were essential to smooth operations. He was loud, impulsive, and impatient while she was quiet, careful, and methodical. The contrast between them became more pronounced with every passing day. The cleaning lady began to take notes in her small notebook. She recorded patterns she observed, identifying the areas where processes often failed and where improvements could make a significant impact. She also noted the strengths and weaknesses of the employees around her, including the son. She understood that real change required more than just fixing physical spaces. It required knowledge, strategy, and timing. By observing and learning quietly, she was preparing herself for the right moment to act. As she worked, employees began to notice her intelligence and efficiency in subtle ways. A misplaced file was suddenly in the correct spot before anyone could complain. An overdue task seemed to complete itself without explanation. One by one, people started to whisper about the strange but welcome improvements. "I don't know who's doing this, but things are running much smoother," one employee said. Another nodded. "It has to be her. She notices everything that we miss." The millionaire's son, meanwhile, had started to sense a shift in the office. He couldn't put his finger on it, but things felt different. People seemed less intimidated by him, and some employees even started ignoring his instructions until they were sure he made sense. His frustration grew, but he still believed he had authority simply because of his name and his father's wealth. He failed to see that true influence came not from money, but from respect, competence, and the ability to understand and solve problems. The cleaning lady continued her quiet campaign. She began to understand the workflow of the office more deeply, mapping out processes in her mind and identifying where improvements could be made. She also started to experiment with small technological solutions, simple spreadsheets to track tasks, reminders to prevent delays, and ways to streamline communication between departments. She didn't announce these changes. She implemented them subtly, often correcting mistakes before anyone even noticed they existed. Her method was careful and calculated, aimed at creating undeniable results. As the week progressed, her efforts began to have more visible effects. Deadlines were met more consistently, mistakes became rarer, and the office ran with an efficiency that surprised even senior employees. People began to recognize that someone was making a difference behind the scenes. Though they still did not know her full potential, they started to admire her dedication, intelligence, and attention to detail. She was no longer just the cleaning lady. They were starting to see her as someone who truly understood the workings of the company. The millionaire's son remained oblivious to the changes. He continued his careless criticisms and arrogant behavior, assuming that his position gave him superiority. He had no idea that the person he had insulted and looked down upon was quietly reshaping the environment around him. Every small correction she made was another step toward demonstrating her abilities and proving that her worth went far beyond the label of a cleaning lady. One afternoon, a minor crisis occurred. A critical document had been misplaced, and the employees panicked as the deadline approached. The cleaning lady noticed the problem immediately. Calmly and efficiently, she retrieved the document from a location no one had thought to check, organized the relevant materials, and even prepared a brief summary for the meeting that followed. When the employees arrived in the conference room, they were surprised to find everything ready and in order. They whispered in amazement, unsure how the situation had been resolved so quickly. The millionaire's son walked in, expecting chaos and excuses, only to find the office running smoothly. He looked around, confused and frustrated. For the first time, he felt a twinge of doubt about his perceived control over the office. Yet he had no idea who was responsible. He assumed it must have been someone else or a fluke, completely missing the cleaning lady's role. She remained in the background, observing quietly, her calm demeanor unchanged. She didn't need recognition yet. She understood that timing was everything. Employees began to approach her quietly for small pieces of advice or assistance, even though she had no formal authority. They recognized her skill and intellect, and while they hadn't seen the full picture, they trusted her judgment. She responded with patience and clarity, never boasting, never asserting superiority. Her actions spoke louder than words. Slowly, her influence was spreading, and the office environment was subtly transforming because of her efforts. Meanwhile, the millionaire's son continued his reckless behavior, increasingly frustrated by the unnoticed changes and the quiet respect growing for someone he had dismissed. He mocked employees, demanded faster results, and tried to assert his authority. But his arrogance was starting to clash with the reality of the office's improved efficiency. Though he did not understand why, he was losing the subtle control he thought he had. Unseen by him, the cleaning lady's influence was steadily growing, built on skill, patience, and intelligence. As the day ended, the cleaning lady paused to take a moment for herself. She reflected on the past week and the quiet progress she had made. She had endured insults, maintained her dignity, and quietly implemented changes that had improved the office. She knew that her work was far from over. The millionaire's son's arrogance would eventually lead to a situation that would reveal the full extent of her abilities, and when that happened, it would shock the entire company. She left the office with a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that her strategy was working. She had observed, planned, and executed small but significant actions that would pave the way for her recognition. She understood that patience, intelligence, and humility were more powerful than arrogance, and she had the skills to turn the office around without confrontation. One day soon, her efforts would be undeniable, and the person who had insulted her would have no choice but to witness her remarkable abilities. Until then, she continued her quiet, strategic work, confident in the knowledge that her time was coming. Weeks passed, and the office had begun to feel the subtle effects of the cleaning lady's quiet efforts. The place ran smoother, employees were more efficient, and small crises were handled without panic. Yet the identity of the person behind these improvements remained a mystery. Whispers about the unknown helper circulated, and people began to pay attention to the cleaning lady. noticing her calm demeanor, precision, and intelligence. Still, they had no idea just how much she was contributing. She continued her work quietly, ensuring everything was in order, but always remaining in the background. The millionaire's son, as usual, remained self-absorbed, unaware of the change that was unfolding around him. He continued criticizing employees for minor mistakes and boasting about his father's achievements. Yet something was different now. Employees were less intimidated by him, and some even started to subtly challenge his decisions or ignore his impulsive instructions until they made sense. Though he sensed the shift, he couldn't understand why it was happening. His arrogance blinded him to the real source of the office's improvement. One morning, an unexpected challenge arose. A major project was due, and the entire team had been working long hours to meet the deadline. A sudden problem threatened to derail everything. Critical data was missing and the staff panicked. The millionaire's son, seeing the chaos, began to blame others, raising his voice and creating tension. He expected someone to fix it instantly, confident that his authority alone should resolve the issue. Meanwhile, the cleaning lady noticed the problem immediately. Calmly, she assessed the situation, remembered where she had seen related files, and began organizing everything. She worked quickly but methodically, locating the missing data, arranging it logically, and preparing a concise summary to present to management. Employees watched in awe as she moved with quiet efficiency, solving the problem with a skill and precision that far surpassed the son's reckless approach. When management arrived, expecting delays and confusion, they were surprised to find everything ready and organized. The project summary was complete and the files were neatly arranged. Whispers spread across the room. "How did this happen so quickly?" one employee asked. Another replied, "I don't know, but it's perfect. Everything is in order." Everyone turned their attention to the cleaning lady, who stood calmly at the side, her expression serene. The millionaire's son was shocked. He had expected to see chaos, his arrogance confirmed, but instead the room was organized and the project was prepared flawlessly. He looked around, searching for someone to take credit, but no one spoke up. His face turned red with embarrassment. He realized for the first time that his privilege and arrogance could not solve every problem. There was someone whose intelligence, diligence, and calm presence made a real difference, and he had never expected it to be the cleaning lady he had insulted. One of the senior managers finally approached her. "These results are exceptional," the manager said. "Who did this?" The cleaning lady spoke quietly but confidently, explaining the steps she had taken, the observations she had made, and the solutions she had implemented. She did not boast, she did not seek recognition, but she explained clearly and effectively. Everyone listened in awe. They realized that her contributions went far beyond her official duties. Employees who had previously underestimated her now looked at her with respect and admiration. They had witnessed her intelligence, her patience, and her ability to handle difficult situations calmly and efficiently. Even the millionaire's son could not ignore the impact of her actions. His previous assumptions about superiority based on wealth and privilege crumbled before the undeniable reality of her abilities. The manager smiled, impressed. "Your work has been invaluable," he said. "You've shown initiative, intelligence, and remarkable problem-solving skills. I think it's time to formally recognize your contributions." The room fell silent as the cleaning lady stood, composed and calm. She had never sought recognition, but she had prepared herself for this moment. Her years of patience, observation, and quiet strategy had led to this point. The millionaire's son, standing nearby, felt a wave of humiliation. He had mocked her, assumed she was incapable, and treated her with arrogance. Now he saw the truth. Her abilities were extraordinary, and she had earned the respect of everyone in the room, including management. His face flushed, and he looked down, unable to meet her steady gaze. She did not gloat, did not mock him. Her quiet confidence was more powerful than any words of insult or superiority. Employees began to speak up, sharing stories of how she had quietly improved processes, corrected errors, and maintained calm in stressful situations. Each story added weight to her reputation, and the son began to understand that his assumptions had been completely wrong. He had been blind to the value of diligence, intelligence, and patience, believing that status and wealth defined superiority. Now he had a lesson in humility he could not ignore. The cleaning lady's next step was subtle but decisive. She proposed improvements to workflow, organized communication channels, and suggested methods to prevent future problems. Her suggestions were clear, practical, and effective. Management listened carefully, recognizing the value of her insights. The office atmosphere began to shift permanently, moving from inefficiency and disorganization to productivity, clarity, and respect. For the first time, the millionaire's son realized that authority and privilege were meaningless without understanding, intelligence, and respect. He saw the cleaning lady as a model of capability and dignity, someone who had earned admiration through quiet action and consistent effort. His embarrassment was deep, but he could not ignore the lesson she had taught through her skill and calm determination. The employees, inspired by her example, began to approach their work with a renewed sense of responsibility. They understood that respect was earned, not demanded, and that intelligence and patience could make a greater impact than arrogance or loudness. The cleaning lady's influence spread beyond her immediate actions, shaping the culture of the office in a way that was lasting and profound. The day ended with a quiet celebration of her contributions. She did not seek attention, but the recognition was well-deserved. Management formally acknowledged her efforts, offering her a role that reflected her skills and capabilities. The millionaire's son, standing to the side, reflected on his arrogance and realized the depth of his mistake. The lesson was clear. Respect, intelligence, and action mattered far more than wealth or inherited status. As she left the office that evening, she felt a sense of accomplishment and calm satisfaction. She had turned the tables not through confrontation or anger, but through strategy, patience, and intelligence. Her dignity had remained intact, and her contributions had been recognized. The office was now a place where her voice mattered, her abilities were respected, and her quiet strength had transformed the environment. The millionaire's son had learned a lesson in humility, and everyone in the office had seen the power of perseverance, intelligence, and calm determination. In that moment, she understood that true strength was not in wealth, privilege, or loud displays of power. True strength was in action, patience, and consistent effort. And through her quiet and deliberate actions, she had not only changed her own life but had also reshaped the company, leaving a lasting impact that would not be forgotten. The office now knew the value of respect, intelligence, and diligence, and the cleaning lady had become a symbol of what could be achieved with quiet determination and unwavering focus. The days after the major recognition were different for everyone in the office. The cleaning lady, once invisible, had become a figure of respect and admiration. Employees who had once ignored her now sought her advice and guidance, and management trusted her opinions on important matters. Her calm demeanor, intelligence, and efficiency had reshaped the office culture, turning it into a place where diligence and skill were valued over status and privilege. The millionaire's son was still in the office, but things had changed for him as well. He walked through the hallways with a new sense of self-awareness, realizing that his previous arrogance had blinded him to the capabilities of others. He had learned a hard lesson. Respect was not given automatically because of wealth or family name. True respect had to be earned through skill, integrity, and consistent effort. Although he struggled with the discomfort of humility, he began to observe the cleaning lady more carefully, recognizing the depth of her abilities and the subtle impact she had on everyone around her. The cleaning lady herself continued her work with the same quiet determination. She was careful not to let recognition inflate her ego. Understanding that true strength lay in consistent action and integrity, she began to take on more responsibilities, gradually helping management with organizational tasks, workflow improvements, and employee coordination. She worked patiently with staff members who had once doubted her, mentoring them in small practical ways. Her influence continued to grow not through authority or intimidation, but through respect, competence, and example. Employees began to adopt her approach in their own work. They observed how she carefully considered every decision, how she remained calm in stressful situations, and how she solved problems with intelligence and creativity. Inspired by her, they started paying closer attention to details, communicating more effectively and handling challenges with a similar quiet confidence. The office as a whole became more efficient, harmonious, and productive. It was clear that her impact went far beyond any single task or project. She had changed the culture of the company. One day, the management decided to hold a small ceremony to formally acknowledge her contributions. The staff gathered in the main conference room, curious and excited. The cleaning lady stood at the back, as always, composed and modest. The senior manager spoke, praising her for her intelligence, diligence, and problem-solving skills. He explained how her quiet efforts had improved efficiency, resolved critical issues, and inspired the employees. The applause that followed was heartfelt and genuine. People who had once overlooked her now looked at her with admiration and gratitude. The millionaire's son was present during the ceremony. He felt a mixture of emotions, embarrassment, humility, and admiration. He realized that he had been completely wrong about her, and that his assumptions had cost him the opportunity to learn from her sooner. He approached her after the ceremony, attempting to speak with a tone of respect rather than arrogance. The cleaning lady listened patiently, her calm expression unchanged. She did not ridicule him, but her quiet confidence spoke volumes about her character. He knew that he had learned an invaluable lesson from her example. In the weeks that followed, the cleaning lady was given a formal role that reflected her skills and capabilities. She was no longer just the person who maintained the office. She was now a trusted advisor in organizational matters. Her responsibilities included improving workflow, mentoring employees, and identifying solutions to operational challenges. She accepted the new role with humility and determination. Understanding that her work was far from over, she continued to lead by example, showing that intelligence, patience, and consistent effort could achieve far more than arrogance and privilege. The millionaire's son, though still learning, began to change as well. He observed her closely, seeking guidance and learning from her methods. Slowly, he began to understand the importance of listening, patience, and strategic thinking. His arrogance diminished as he realized that true influence was earned, not inherited. Though it was a slow and sometimes uncomfortable process, he started to develop a sense of humility and responsibility, inspired by the quiet example of the cleaning lady. The office continued to thrive under the new dynamics. Employees worked more effectively, communication improved, and the overall morale was higher than ever. People began to appreciate the value of respect, diligence, and intelligence rather than status or privilege. The cleaning lady's journey had not only transformed her own life, but had also created a ripple effect, improving the workplace for everyone around her. Outside the office, the cleaning lady's life also changed. She felt more confident, recognized, and empowered. She knew that her efforts had been validated, but she remained grounded, understanding that her work was about more than recognition. It was about integrity, skill, and perseverance. She continued to approach every task with care, whether it was a minor adjustment or a major project, knowing that her actions spoke louder than words. The millionaire's son, observing her every day, realized the true value of humility, patience, and respect. He began to interact with employees differently, seeking their input and learning to value their perspectives. Though he still had much to learn, he had taken his first steps toward becoming a more responsible and aware individual. He knew that his previous arrogance had been a barrier to understanding the true nature of leadership and influence. As months passed, the cleaning lady's impact continued to be felt. Her methods, patience, and intelligence became a model for others in the company. Employees were inspired by her example, adopting similar approaches in their own work. The office culture shifted permanently, emphasizing respect, competence, and collaboration over status or arrogance. She had not only transformed her own position, but had also left a lasting legacy in the company. The story of the cleaning lady became well known within the company. Employees shared her example with new hires, highlighting the importance of patience, observation, and quiet determination. She became a symbol of what could be achieved through intelligence, resilience, and consistent effort, showing that anyone, regardless of their background or initial position, could make a significant impact if they acted with integrity and skill.